Every June, 1,000 people climb down to a gorge in the Peruvian Andes and cut their only bridge loose. They stand on opposite walls of the canyon and watch it drop. Nearly 100 feet straight into the white water of the Apurimac River. Then they build a new one, not from steel, not from timber, from grass. Dried mountain grass, twisted into cord, braided into cable as thick as a man's thigh, stretched across the canyon and walked across the same afternoon. It carries people, it carries loads. It has done both on that exact spot for 500 years. The bridge is called Queswachaca, and the part nobody mentions is that it is not a relic. It is the last living example of something that should not have worked even once, and worked so well that an entire empire ran on it. A single strand of that grass is tougher than it looks, and nowhere near strong enough on its own to hold any real weight. So the obvious question is the wrong one. The question isn't how grass holds a grown adult over a river. The question is why these builders reached for grass at all. When every engineer alive today would tell you there is exactly one material for the job and it isn't a plant. That material is steel. And to understand why the ancient world didn't need it, you have to understand what steel is actually for. Walk past any modern bridge and the steel is doing one specific thing. It is resisting tension. The force that pulls a material apart stretches it, tries to tear it in half. Steel is extraordinary at that. It can be stretched and yanked and loaded in ways that would shatter almost anything else. That single property is why it sits inside nearly every large structure built in the last 150 years. Now look at stone. Stone is the opposite animal. Squeeze it, push it, press it, stack a mountain on top of it. And it barely notices. Granite can take thousands of pounds per square inch in compression. But pull on that same stone, stretch it, put it in tension, and it fails almost immediately. Roughly speaking, stone can be something like 10 times stronger being squeezed than being stretched. So picture the problem an ancient engineer was handed. He has stone, which loves compression and dies in tension. He has no steel to take the tension for him. A flat slab laid across a gap is the worst possible answer. The underside of that slab is in pure tension, and it cracks. He cannot outmuscle the physics. So he doesn't try, he does something far smarter. He builds a shape where tension never appears in the first place. That shape is the arch. Curve the stone, and every block leans on the next, and the entire load, the weight of the bridge, the weight of everything crossing it, gets routed downward and outward as compression, squeezing. The one thing stone is built for. There is no stretched underside to crack because the geometry has erased it. This is the answer hiding underneath the whole question. How did they build bridges without steel? They didn't overcome the absence of steel. They engineered a world where the need for steel never came up. And once you see that move, you start seeing it everywhere, including in places where it predates almost everything you'd expect. In the hills of southern Greece, there is a bridge you can still drive a car over, though you are technically only allowed to walk. It is called the Archidiko Bridge, and it was built around 1300 years before Christ. That is not a typo. While the pyramids were already ancient and Rome was still 1,000 years from existing, the Mycenaeans threw a stone span across a ravine that is still carrying foot traffic 33 centuries later. Look closely at it, and the strangeness sets in. There is no mortar. Nothing glues those stones together. No cement, no binder, not a drop of anything. There is also no keystone, the wedge-shaped stone at the top of a true arch that locks the whole ring into compression. The Archidiko Bridge has neither because it isn't a true arch at all. It's a corbel arch. Flat stones stacked in layers, each layer pushed slightly further out over the gap than the one below, leaning inward and inward until the two sides nearly kiss at the top. What holds it together is weight, mass, balance, and the patience of stones placed so precisely that gravity alone locks them. And it was not built for people. The roadway is around 18 feet wide, and the surface still carries the curbed stones cut to guide the wheels of chariots. a Bronze Age highway engineered for traffic, surviving earthquakes that have leveled cities built 3,000 years more recently. The Mycenaeans were doing this a full millennium before Rome got the credit for perfecting the arch. For a long time, Arcatico held the title most people would have given it, the oldest standing bridge in the world. Then the record quietly changed hands, and almost no one noticed. In southern Iraq, on the ground that was once Sumer, there is a structure archaeologists studied for the better part of a century while calling it the wrong thing. They thought it was a dam, or part of a temple. It sat there, cataloged and misunderstood, until a closer look revealed what it actually spanned: an ancient waterway. It was a bridge, roughly 4,000 years old and older than Arcatico by centuries, and it had been hiding in plain sight under the wrong label the entire time. The Bridge of Girsu didn't just join the list of ancient bridges, it rewrote the top of it. The thing you were told was the oldest was already out of date. But the deepest engineering didn't come from the oldest sites, it came from the cleverest. And the single most advanced stone bridge of the ancient world was finished in the year 605 by a craftsman working centuries ahead of everyone around him. His name was Li Chun, and the bridge is the Anji Bridge in northern China. From a distance, it looks almost modern, a low, clean arch, nothing like the heavy semicircles Rome was building. That low profile is the genius. Instead of a full half circle, Li Chun used a shallow segment of a much larger circle, a flatter arc that crosses more distance with less stone. And then he did something that on paper sounds reckless. He cut holes in his own bridge. Look at the shoulders of the Anji Bridge and you'll see 4 smaller arches, 2 on each side, carved straight through the structure where solid stone would normally sit. They do 2 jobs at once. They strip dead weight out of the bridge, lightening the load on the foundations. And when the river floods, water pours through those openings instead of slamming into a solid wall and ripping the bridge off its banks. This is called an open spandrel design, and here is the number that should stop you. That idea, common in China by the end of the 6th century, wouldn't become common in Europe until the middle of the 1800s, 1,200 years. And the bridge is no fragile museum piece. It has stood through at least 8 wars, 10 major floods, and more earthquakes than anyone bothered to count, including a magnitude 7.2 quake in 1966 whose epicenter sat only about 25 miles away. The ornamental railings have been swapped out over the centuries. The structure Li Chun designed has never needed to be. Stone, then, had its answer. Force every load into compression, and the absence of steel becomes irrelevant. But that only covers half the problem, because sometimes you can't build an arch. Sometimes the gap is too wide, the river too deep, the canyon walls too far apart for any stack of stones to reach. Sometimes you need a material that can actually take tension, that can stretch across the void and hold. The ancient world's answer to that is where it stops looking like engineering and starts looking like something closer to magic. In the northeast of India, in a region called Meghalaya that catches some of the heaviest rainfall on the planet, the Khasi people needed to cross rivers that turn into churning monsoon torrents for months at a time. Wood rots in that climate. Conventional bridges get undermined and washed out, so they didn't build their bridges. They grew them. They take the rubber fig tree, a species whose roots reach out through the air searching, anchor hungry, and they train those living roots across the river, slowly, over years, guiding them along scaffolds, coaxing them toward the far bank. When the roots reach the other side, they dig in, and then they keep growing. They thicken. They wrap around each other and fuse root grafting into root until a tangled, breathing net of living wood spans the entire river. Here is what that means, and it inverts the logic of every other bridge ever made. A steel bridge starts dying the day it's finished. Rust, fatigue, the slow surrender to weather. A living root bridge does the opposite. Every year, the roots grow a little thicker and a little stronger. Every year, it heals its own small damage because it is alive. Some of these bridges are believed to be several hundred years old, and once mature, a single span can hold dozens of people at once. It is the only kind of bridge on Earth that is stronger right now than it was the day you first saw it. And there's a catch buried in that beauty, one that says something brutal about time. The trees have to mature before you can even begin. More than a decade of waiting. Then the roots need 2 or 3 more decades of training and thickening before the bridge can hold weight. Do the math on a human life. The person who starts a living root bridge will almost never walk across it. They are building for grandchildren they may never meet, planting a structure they have already accepted they will not live to use. There are no blueprints. The knowledge of how to read a tree, how to guide a root, how to coax a crossing out of a riverbank lives only in the people, handed down generation to generation like a language. And the structures it produces are so strange that modern engineers studying them can't even sort them into one category. A single root bridge can behave like a suspension bridge in one section, an arch in another, a truss somewhere else, all woven into the same living span. It breaks the classification system because nothing designed on a drawing board grows like that. Which brings us back to the grass and to the empire that turned the impossible into infrastructure. The Inca didn't have one grass bridge, they had a network of them. At the empire's height, nearly 200 woven suspension bridges hung across the gorges of the Andes, knitting a mountain civilization together over chasms that no stone arch could ever have spanned. The roads of an empire ran on twisted grass. Grass is the tension material steel would eventually become. Twist enough of it together, and it pulls without snapping, doing the one job stone never could. And because a rope bridge flexes, sways, gives, moves with the load, it does something a rigid stone bridge can never do. When an earthquake rolls through the Andes, and they do frequently, the grass bridge bends and rides it out. A stiff span would crack. The flexible one survives by refusing to fight the force. The price of that magic is that grass rots fast. A woven bridge rarely lasts more than a year or two before the fibers weaken and the whole thing has to come down. So the Inca built the maintenance into the design itself. The bridge was meant to die and be reborn on a schedule, which is exactly what still happens at Cueshuachaca. The old span cut loose to fall into the river, a new one twisted and braided and stretched across the gorge in 3 days of communal work, repeated every single year for half a millennium. 200 bridges, once, one left now. Every other strand of that network is gone. And they didn't simply rot away into history. Some of them were cut down on purpose by the people who were most impressed by them. When the Spanish arrived to conquer the empire, the suspension bridges astonished them. Nothing in Europe spanned gorges that wide. The conquistadors had never seen engineering like it. And then they cut them down. Inca bridges were severed to slow the Spanish advance on the capital, spans so good the invaders both marveled at them and destroyed them. Quehuachaca was rebuilt anyway, and kept being rebuilt long after the empire that designed it was gone. Compression on one side, tension on the other. That was the whole toolkit, or it was until one Chinese bridge did something that doesn't fit in either column. It didn't route around the need for a binding material. It didn't replace steel with rope. It grew its own glue, out of living animals. The Luoyang Bridge on the coast of Fujian province was built starting in the year 1053 across a tidal estuary where fresh river water meets the sea. That's a nightmare to build in. The current is strong, the water is salt, and the stone foundations kept getting undermined and washed out. The builders needed something to lock the foundation stones into a single solid mass. And they had no mortar of their own that could hold for centuries while submerged in that tidal salt water. So they farmed oysters. They seeded oysters onto the stone piers and the foundation blocks and let them grow. And as oysters do, they latched on, gripping the stone, spreading into dense clusters, secreting the natural cement that anchors them to any surface they touch. As the colonies expanded, they bridged the gaps between blocks, filled the seams, and fused the loose stone into one continuous, living, self-repairing mass. A mortar that grew itself, healed itself, and got stronger as the colony spread. It is the first recorded time in history that a living organism was deliberately enlisted to reinforce a bridge. Biological engineering, 900 years before anyone had a word for it. The oysters solved how to hold the bridge together. There was still the small matter of the bridge itself. Granite beams weighing up to 15 tons each that somehow had to be lifted into place over open tidal water with no cranes, no machines, nothing but muscle and boats. The builders used the moon. They floated the massive stone beams out on wooden rafts at low tide and maneuvered them into position over the piers. Then they waited. As the tide rose, the water lifted the rafts, and the rafts lifted the 15-ton beams, and the stone rose into place on the back of the ocean itself. When the tide fell again, the beam settled exactly onto its supports, and the sea drained away from under a finished span. They turned the gravitational pull of the moon into a free crane twice a day on schedule. The very foundation method underneath it, laying long stone embankments underwater to spread the load, wouldn't catch on in Western engineering for centuries. So here is everything the ancient world actually had. They could span a flood on bare-stacked stone with no mortar and no metal. They could throw an arch so advanced, the West needed 12 centuries to copy it. They could grow a bridge out of living roots that strengthens for centuries. They could weave a grass cable that outrides earthquakes and grow their own cement out of shellfish and lift 15-ton stones with the tide. None of it required steel. Most of it has outlasted things we built last century, and nearly all of it is gone. Which leaves the question that's been sitting under this whole thing. If these methods worked, if some of them outperform what replaced them, why did we stop? The honest answer isn't that anyone banned them. No committee outlawed the living root bridge. No law forbids weaving grass across a canyon. What killed these methods is quieter and harder to fight than a ban. They don't scale. A root bridge takes 50 years and a specific tree and knowledge that can't be printed in a manual. A grass bridge needs an entire community showing up every June. An oyster foundation needs a tidal estuary and decades of patience. You cannot mass produce any of it, cannot schedule it onto a construction timeline, cannot finance it, cannot stamp it onto a permit and pour it on a deadline. Steel and standardized concrete won for one reason above all others. They are fast, uniform, and the same everywhere. A beam in one city is identical to a beam in another, and a crew can raise a span in months instead of generations. The modern world didn't choose them because the old ways failed. It chose them because the old ways asked for something it had decided it could no longer spare: time, place, living material, and the willingness to build a bridge you will never cross.